For 28 years, my life was organized around what my son needed. And when I say organized, I mean that it was shaped like a shadow around the light he represented. I was a solo mother in a city where no one remembers your name if you don't carry an important surname. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. I swallowed my tears so as not to scare him. I disguised fear with cake recipes. I learned to smile with my eyes while my body just wanted to lie down and disappear. I never remarried, not for lack of an invitation, but for being too clear-sighted. The few men who approached me understood straight away. In that house, everything revolved around a boy called Noah, and I wouldn't accept anyone who didn't put his well-being as an absolute priority. After all, if even his father couldn't do it, why should I believe any other man? Noah grew up seeing me as the rock of the house, the one who solved things, the one who could handle it, the one who guessed, the one who held everything together. But no one asks what happens to a rock when it starts to crack from the inside. No one imagines that behind the firmness there is a fatigue so great that sometimes the body falls asleep on the bus and only wakes up at the final stop. When he married Lacey, I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought someone would finally love him the way I did. Someone would share the burden, the care, the weight, and also the joy. I made myself available, as always. I baked the wedding cake. I spent hours hand-embroidering a set of towels with their initials. It wasn't for the gift. It was for the symbolism. A home begins with small gestures of care. Only they didn't understand. Or they didn't care. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I was the mother-in-law who only showed up when called, the one who looks after the grandchild when they both need to go out, the one who cleans the house when they're both very tired, the one who prepares food, organizes cupboards, changes diapers in the middle of the night, picks up toys from the floor, like someone picking up the remains of their own efforts. I've never asked for anything, not even a thank you. I just wanted to be around, to be useful. The sentence came like a bad shot. It didn't kill, but it left me bleeding inside. "You're invading our space." Lacey said it with such a calm smile that I felt even more humiliated. And Noah lowered his eyes as if he was ashamed. But not of me, of my presence, of my insistence, of my existence. The next morning, he took me for coffee to a place I'd never been to before. I was suspicious, but I accepted. It was near the hospital where I'd had my last checkup, which was perhaps already a sign that this meeting wasn't just about scrambled eggs and pancakes. While stirring sugar into his coffee, Noah took a deep breath and said that it was best for everyone, that I deserved peace, that the place was nice, with big windows and an indoor garden. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the reception area of a private nursing home with a smiling lady showing me rooms and medication schedules. And there he was, with his eyes watering but his mouth firm. A docile executioner. I walked home in silence. He was awkward. He tried to say something in the car, but I just stared out of the window. When he parked in front of the house, I saw it. The suitcases. They were already on the sidewalk. Mine, tidily packed, as if they were helping me move on. When in fact, they were kicking me out with the kindness typical of cowards. That wasn't abandonment. It was a discard. Over the next few days, I'll tell you how this nursing home with an internal garden turned into a prison of flowered curtains and empty eyes. The first night in the nursing home was a long, muffled noise, like when someone throws a souvenir down a well and the sound takes a while to come back. It smelled of stale lavender, overboiled sheets, and loneliness barely disguised by plastic flowers. The room was small, with furniture that seemed to have been chosen to please no one, functional, cold, impersonal. There was a TV in the corner, too low to watch from bed, but loud enough not to let me forget that there was always something on, even if nothing interested me anymore. The window overlooked the garden that Noah had mentioned so enthusiastically, a green rectangle surrounded by railings that seemed to smile crookedly at me. "Cute," he said. It wasn't. It took me a while to unpack, partly because I still believed it was a temporary misunderstanding, Partly because if I opened and hung up the clothes, I would be admitting that this place was, in fact, my new home. I did neither. I left everything locked up in the corner, as if my stay had an end date, even though it didn't. Noah returned 2 days later with a packet of wholemeal cookies and a new moisturizer. He sat down in the armchair next to the bed like someone visiting a distant relative, someone you don't quite know how to greet. He said that everything was fine with his grandson, that Lacey had the flu, but was getting better, that the house was silent. I didn't answer. I just nodded, my head hanging slightly, like old people do in soap operas when they want to appear wise in the midst of their own tragedy. He said that perhaps I needed some space, and that this was a way of looking after myself too. I laughed, not with my mouth, but with my chest. A bitter, dry laugh that rose up in me like a sob that had been trapped for decades. It wasn't space I needed. It was ground. It was presence. It was gratitude instead of favor. But that was something you can't buy or explain. You either feel it or you don't. Over the next few days, I was swallowed up by the routine of the place. Everything smelled like protocol and tasted like emotional rations. The other residents seemed like ghosts of themselves. Some repeated the same 5 topics all day long. Others just looked out of the window, waiting for someone who never came. I was the only one who still couldn't accept being there. I was the only one who still felt kidnapped on a clear day. I tried to write a letter. One. To Noah. Not to ask for anything, just to say that it hurt. That it wasn't a place. It was a hole. That time didn't pass there. It fell apart. But I stopped in the middle, because I realized that any written word would be interpreted as drama, as neediness, as emotional manipulation. I already knew what they would say. You're well looked after. You have everything here. What's the problem? The problem is that I exist, and nobody seems to remember that anymore. One day, in the cafeteria, a lady called Ruth asked if I was new. I said yes, with that protocol tone of someone who doesn't want to bond with anyone. She smiled and said that her son had put her there too, after he married a younger girl, pretty, full of ideas. He said the house was too small for 3 adults, and here I am. Her smile seemed strong, but her eyes were completely exhausted, like mine, like those of almost everyone there. It was a colony of old mothers pushed aside by children who didn't want to appear cruel, so they outsourced the blame. I started walking down the corridor early in the morning, just to try to breathe another breath of air. But even the air there seemed to have an owner. Nurses passed by with trays, others with charts, and looked at me as if I were just another body in the queue of time. I started to listen to some soft music on the radio in the cafeteria, old songs that reminded me of the times I used to dance in the kitchen while frying pancakes for Noah. He always asked for 2, one with honey, one with butter. It was a ritual of ours. And now? Now he was probably eating pancakes with Lacey, and maybe he didn't even remember mine. I had a visit from the grandson on Sunday, for exactly 17 minutes. He looked confused, fiddling with his cell phone while his grandmother tried to play with him using an old plastic stroller I found in the box in the donation area. When Noah came to pick him up, he said they were in a hurry because they had lunch. I stood on the porch of the nursing home, watching the car disappear over the horizon, as if that was where another part of my story was leaving. I didn't cry that day, nor the next, but something inside me began to fester, as if an old, almost fossilized feeling was beginning to peel away from the inner wall of my chest. It was anger, yes, but it was also an old pain that had no name, but had always lived there. I'd just disguised it well. The next few days passed like a string of soulless Sundays. In here, time doesn't walk. It crawls, stumbles, creeps until it disappears. Everything is clean, organized, and functional. But nothing smells like home. The excessive cleanliness serves more to disguise abandonment than to bring any comfort. The sound of the morning alarm clock doesn't come from an ordinary alarm clock, but from hurried footsteps in the corridor, technical voices calling out names, and the repetitive clink of cutlery hitting plastic trays. Nobody wakes up of their own free will. We wake up because the system forces us to. Sometimes I think that my whole life has been a wait disguised as a routine. I waited for recognition while I washed Noah's clothes on Sundays. I expected affection as I prepared his lunchboxes for school with hidden notes that he never commented on. I expected to be present on birthdays when he said he had too much work to stop by. And even then, I waited. A mother's love is like that. You wait until you already know the answer. In here, nobody asks what we used to do. We're all reductions. The lady in room 14 had early-onset Alzheimer's. The man in room 22 had 3 heart attacks. The woman at the end of the corridor was a librarian, they say. I'm the new one. The one who arrived without much conversation. The one who doesn't smile much. The one who hasn't got used to it yet. The nurse named Carla always tries to strike up a conversation. A nice girl, but with the look of someone who has seen so many dropouts that she has learned not to get attached. In one of these conversations, she said that I seemed too lucid to be here. I wanted to laugh, but I just said, thank you. Lucid? I don't know. Perhaps lucid enough to realize that I was pushed here as if I were a defeated piece on a board that no longer fit into anyone's game. Lucid enough to understand that my son didn't bring me to this place out of lack of choice, but out of convenience. Lucid enough to know that no one is coming to get me. The reception phone rang twice that week. The first time, an employee told me that Noah had just called to confirm that I'd had my flu shot. The second time, Lacey called to ask if she could leave her grandson with me on Saturday afternoon, just for a few hours. I swallowed dry, like someone who swallows medicine without water. I said yes, and when I hung up, I realized how much I was still trying to please. I was still saying yes. I was still accepting emotional crumbs as if they were banquets. I was still trying to convince myself that, somehow, this was what being a mother meant. Giving, even when you only get absences. On Saturday, the grandson came. He had a tablet in his hand and an industrialized juice in his backpack. He didn't even look at me properly. He sat in the corner of the living room and started watching videos of children screaming and jumping on colorful screens that gave me a headache just listening to them. I tried to make conversation, but I realized that he didn't know much about me. I'm just the granny who lives in that old people's house with the funny smell. I prepared a sandwich. He didn't want one. He said the bread was too soft. He complained about the fan. He asked for Wi-Fi. And once again I found myself looking after someone who didn't know I was there, whole, invisible. After Noah came to pick him up, he thanked me quickly, like someone leaving a doctor's appointment. He didn't want to come in. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He said that Sunday was busy, that they were still going to the supermarket. I kissed my grandson on the forehead and closed the iron gate with a slow, painful creak, like someone closing a chapter that repeats itself every week. That night, I dreamt of the kitchen in my old house. Everything was in place. The dishcloth with sunflowers hanging from it, the kettle on the fire, the sound of the TV in the background, and me, with my hands dipped in soapy water, smiling at nothing. I woke up crying. I started writing in an old notebook I found in the recreation ward, not to record the routine here, but to keep from going crazy. Writing has been my way of existing without asking permission. On paper, I still have a voice. I still have a past. I'm still someone. Because here, everything seems programmed to erase us little by little. Every sheet changed. Every dish taken away before we've finished. Every visit scheduled to end. Everything is a reminder that we're in suspension, waiting for the end, but with an uncertain date. Sometimes I look out of the window and see mothers walking with small children. They pull strollers, carry backpacks, hold toys, smile like they don't yet know the price of it all. I want to shout. I want to say that one day they will grow up, and that it's not time that destroys the bond. It's ingratitude. It's silence. It's the tiredness of always being useful, but never being seen as essential. But I don't shout. Because if there's one thing I've learned in all these years, it's that nobody listens to an old woman who speaks up. They say it's crazy. They say it's senility, that it's bitterness. It's never true. It's never pain. I've become good at pretending. I pretend I like watery soup. I pretend that the background music calms me down. I pretend I don't mind Sundays without visitors. I pretend I have plans. But inside, all I have left are memories hanging on crooked nails, and a name that was once called urgently, but today only appears in calendar reminders. The following week began with a notice on the wall. There would be a family mourning on Saturday. One of those events, thought up by well-meaning coordinators to pretend that we still have some bond on the outside. The poster had a drawing of balloons, cake, plastic chairs, and a promise that sounded almost ironic. Unforgettable moments with those you love. I read it 3 times, then tore the paper off without thinking. I was scolded by the receptionist who said I couldn't tear up official communication. I apologized, and I went back to my room with anger stuck in my throat. I spent the week trying to understand why it had hit me so hard. Perhaps because there's nothing crueler than being offered what you know you've been denied. It's like throwing a party outside an orphan's window. Too colorful, too noisy, too distant. I thought about calling Noah, not to insist that he come, just to hear his voice, just to confirm that he was still real. But I gave up, because there are some things that, when you ask, you destroy yourself even more. If I asked, and he said he couldn't, it would be like tearing up the last entire photograph of our relationship. And if he said yes, and came out of obligation, it would be even worse. On Saturday, I woke up earlier than usual. The courtyard was decorated with cheap ribbons and half-wilted balloons. Some residents got carried away. They put on their best clothes, those reserved for weddings and funerals. One lady wore too much perfume. Another put on crooked lipstick, all trying to look a little more alive, all pretending, once again, that they would be seen. And some were. Children, grandchildren, sons-in-law and daughters-in-law came. There was cake. There were photos. There were fake hugs from people who barely disguised their relief at leaving so soon. I sat near the entrance, like someone who doesn't want to appear hopeful, but whose heart is still attentive to the sound of a familiar engine. At 11 a.m., they started cleaning up the remains of the cake. An employee asked if I wanted to take a photo to post on the wall. I replied with a vague nod. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. It hurt so much that I had to pretend for a few minutes that I had a backache, just to justify the heavy silence on my face. I went back to my room and closed the curtains. I slept for the rest of the day, or at least I tried to. On Sunday, Ruth knocked on my door. She brought a cookie that her daughter had baked. "She came yesterday," she said, with a proud smile. It's not much, but she remembered that I like cinnamon. I thanked her. I smiled. But when I closed the door, I leaned against it and cried for the first time in a long time. It wasn't a desperate cry. It was an exhausted cry. No sobbing, no drama, just that salty water that drips out when your body has nowhere else to store so much. I cried because I had been forgotten, but even more so for realizing that, deep down, perhaps I no longer meant anything to anyone. I began to avoid the common areas, the TV room, the cafeteria, the benches in the garden. I stayed more in my room. I read and reread the same book, not because I liked it, but because I already knew the ending, and it was safer to deal with endings you already knew. One day, rummaging through my drawer, I found an old photo. It was Noah and me, sitting on the living room floor, with a toy car on his lap and a lopsided smile. I had a young face, my hair in a hasty bun, and a paint-stained shirt. I remembered that week I had painted his entire room by myself. Light blue, because he said dark blue was scary at night. I remembered that at the end of the painting, I fell down the stairs and hit my knee. I had a limp for a week, but he slept smiling, and I thought that was enough. Today, I think about how I was conditioned to think that love was enough, that caring was enough, that giving so much of myself would guarantee me a captive place in someone's heart. But love, when it's not reciprocated, is like blowing up a punctured balloon. You get tired, you fill your lungs, but the air always escapes. And in the end, you're just breathless and ashamed of having tried so hard. I started walking more slowly, not because I'm physically tired, but because my soul no longer sees any point in rushing. When someone asks me if I want to take part in the activities, I say maybe, but I won't. I prefer to sit on the balcony and watch the clouds. At least they change shape without apologizing. One night, while I was making my bed, I heard a nurse's voice in the hallway. She said, "There's a lady here who cries quietly every day after dinner, but she never asks for anything. She just cries." I don't know if it was about me, but if it was, it wouldn't be a lie. The pain inside is silent. It's like mold taking over the walls from the inside, even though everything still looks livable on the outside. At the end of that week, I received an early Christmas card. It was from the condominium where I used to live. A generic card sent out in bulk. But even so, it made me feel more remembered than anyone in my own family had done in recent months. I thought about replying with a letter. "Hi, this is the woman who disappeared without a fuss. The one who cleaned the stairs when no one was looking. The one who held the elevator until the last resident got in. The one who now lives in a room with beige walls where no one knocks on the door because they want to, only because it's protocol. But I didn't write it down. Because even for that, I lacked the will. All that's left is tiredness and memory. And sometimes, that's more than you can carry." It took me a while to accept that this was no longer a phase. It was the end of a cycle. Not the end of life itself, but of what I once understood as my life. A name on an intercom, a key in my bag, a place at the dinner table. Here, I've become a record, a chart, a medical file, a numbered bed. The name is still the same, but no one calls you with the intention of belonging. And that, more than any diagnosis, is what really erases us. The nights have gotten longer, and not because the weather has changed, but because inside my head everything has started to echo more. Every silence lasts longer. Every thought stretches out like an old sheet that never fits properly again. I've started walking the corridors after everything has calmed down, when the nurses change shifts and the patients go to sleep. It's the only moment when I feel any peace. I like to listen to the sound of refrigeration in the corners of the wall, that continuous whisper that sounds like a restrained lament. It's the most honest sound in this place. I once sat by the door of room 23. There lives a lady who talks to her dead husband every night. In a low voice, she says that he should have taken her with him, that her coffee was never good again, that her grandson forgot to call her on her birthday. I've never seen her face properly, but hearing someone's voice asking the absent person to explain gave me a strange feeling of familiarity, as if I too had spoken for years to someone who no longer listened to me. Noah didn't call anymore. Since that last visit, when he handed me a juice box and a thermal sock, he's disappeared. He didn't text me on my birthday. He didn't ask about the cardiologist's report, nor about the leg pain I'd mentioned weeks before. It's as if he had achieved exactly what he wanted, to package my existence in a place where he could visit or ignore it without any weight, a safe space between guilt and convenience. The other day, a new employee commented that this kind of abandonment isn't malice, it's tiredness. Tired of caring, tired of living together, tired of dealing with old people who remind you of too many things. I thought about it. Maybe it's true. Perhaps the greatest crime of old age is not the failing body, but the failing memory. We remember everything. When you held someone's hand tightly, when you slept on the sofa to wait for a fever to subside, when you sold your own wedding ring to pay off your son's card bill, and when those memories come back, they hurt more than any rheumatism. I started writing little notes to myself, not as a diary, but as a reminder that I was someone. Today, I walked to the tree in the courtyard. Today, I was able to laugh at a Ruth joke. Today, I remembered my mother's voice telling me I was strong. These are small proofs of life, because sometimes the world treats us as if we were just waiting. One day, the intercom rang. I was in the shower, and when I came back, Ruth came running to say that my son was in reception. I almost slipped on my slippers. My heart raced, and I thought I was going to faint. But when I got there, it was a mistake. Another man, with a similar name. The receptionist's smile died in the middle. I smiled back, like someone apologizing for existing. I went back to my room feeling ashamed. Ashamed of having believed for a second. Ashamed of having run. In recent months, I've begun to understand what it means to disappear in life. It's not disappearing suddenly. It means gradually becoming absent. An invitation that doesn't come. A phone call that never comes. A later we'll see that is never fulfilled. A Christmas when you're not remembered. A grandchild who grows up without knowing your full name. Disappearing in life is when the world moves on, and you stop. Not because you wanted to, but because they left you behind and never came back. At this point, I don't expect to see you again. I don't expect a letter, a visit, or a belated acknowledgement. What I'd really like is to be able to go back in time, just for a moment, and tell that 30-something woman who cried hiding in the factory bathroom so as not to worry her son that she deserved better, that she should have said no a few times, that she shouldn't have carried so much on her own, that love given too much with no return becomes an emotional debt, and nobody pays a debt they think never existed. Last Friday, Ruth didn't show up for breakfast. They knocked on her door, and she didn't answer. They went in, and she stood there, serene. She went to sleep and never woke up. They organized a quick ceremony in the garden. Her daughter came. She cried. She apologized. She said she regretted not coming more. A speech that made me swallow, because that could have been me. A farewell to someone who no one else knew what laughter sounded like. In the evening, I sat alone in the empty cafeteria. I wrote another note. Today, I remembered that love without presence is just a beautiful ghost. I folded it up and left it on the table. No one will read it, but it's as if I'm telling myself, you're still here. You still are. I don't know how much time I have left, but I know what I've missed. And as hard as it was to admit, today I understand. What they called space was just distance. What they called care was just obligation. What they called love, perhaps it never was. And yet, I'm still here, tired, but standing. Because even if I'm discarded, I'm still history. And you? Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you've mistaken presence for annoyance and caution for invasion, when, in fact, all that person wanted was to still have a place in your life? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to leave your like below.